The Zarkan fleet arrived with fire, steel, and arrogance, 40,000 warships, 12 starkillers, and the arrogance of an empire that had never known defeat. But when they breached Sol space to crush the last human resistance, there was no Earth. Just a void. Just a whisper. Just a voice, narrating their doom before it happened. They came with banners forged from 1,000 worlds, engines louder than gods, and weapons that cracked moons like bones. The Zarkan Imperium had never lost a war. It had never even considered the concept. And now, in the year 2793, it stood before its final target, Earth. The voice of Commander Karzin echoed across the command deck, his violet eyes narrowed beneath the ornate crown of conquest. Deploy Formation Alpha Zero. Prepare the war chant. I want this primitive rock shattered before dinner. They dropped from hyperspace like falling daggers, 40,000 ships aligned across Sol's edge. But what greeted them wasn't resistance. It was nothing. No Earth. No moon. No defense grid. Not even orbital debris. Just an unnatural silence. A void where the third planet should have been. Karzin blinked. What trickery is this? Has the human homeworld cloaked itself? The navigators checked and rechecked their instruments, each one stammering more than the last. Sir, we have coordinates. They're correct. But there is no planetary mass. The communications array lit up without warning. A human voice slid across every frequency, clear, calm, with a touch of contempt. Hello, Zarkan Command. I'm Darius Vance. You've arrived precisely where you intended to. Earth, as you know it, is gone. But don't worry. The story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. Silence seized the bridge. Then chaos. Orders were barked. Scans initiated. Weapons armed. The nearest human vessel, a single, pitch-black cruiser, drifted in the center of the void like a ghost. No response to hails. No power signature. No life signs. Vance's voice returned, now echoing through internal ship speakers without authorization. I see you've brought a fleet. Admirable. Overcompensation has always been your style. But this isn't a battle anymore. It's a reading. You'll find that you're already characters in a story, one you can't control. Karzin sneered. Destroy that vessel. Now. 3 dreadnoughts moved in perfect sync, charging their plasma lances. The black cruiser did not move. As the lances fired, space around the cruiser shimmered, flexed, and then inverted. The weapons simply vanished. Then one of the dreadnoughts, the Magner's Wrath, disappeared. Not exploded. Not disabled. Just gone. Its position in the formation collapsed like it had never existed. Logs were scrambled. Crew lists overwritten. Only the name remained, echoing faintly in corrupted archives. Karzin staggered back. Report! What happened? One ensign's hands trembled. It was written out, sir. The system says it was narratively concluded. That doesn't make sense. That's not even a military term. Vance chuckled in their ears. That was Chapter 1. Your mistake was treating Earth like a battleground. But we stopped fighting wars the usual way centuries ago. We evolved. You're not fighting soldiers anymore. You're fighting authors. Another dreadnought tried to pull back. It began reversing, then looped, resetting to the same moment again and again, as if trapped in a corrupted holonovel. Its crew screamed as time fragmented around them. Inside every Zarkan ship, screens flickered with scrolling text. Dreadnought Halaktor turned to flee, but he was already too late. He'd been written as a coward 3 pages ago. And Halaktor's ship imploded, its matter folding into itself, not from damage, but from narrative collapse. Karzin bellowed. Vance! What is this madness? The reply was instant. This is what happens when you try to conquer a species that learned to weaponize story. You think in fire and steel. We think in outcomes. Causality. Rewrites. You thought you were the invaders, but you've already been conquered, by context. Zarkan technicians attempted to isolate the signal source. Firewalls burned. Fire control arrays turned against themselves. Even AI companions began quoting Vance's words like gospel. Tactical systems wrote themselves into paradoxes. Orders issued by Karzan were overridden by lines of narrative that appeared in their own systems, predicting his every move, before he made them. He whispered, "They're narrating us." Vance's voice softened, almost sympathetic. "We had to change the rules. You never gave us a choice. You glassed Mars. You tried to erase our history. So we embraced the only thing you couldn't bomb, our voice. Our memory. Our stories. We became myth, and then we made you the ending." A cruiser near the edge of the formation suddenly vanished, its last transmission a panic scream. "We're being edited!" Karzan slammed his fists against the command dais. "I demand honorable combat." A pause. Then Vance returned, this time amused. "You're not listening. There is no combat. There is only a conclusion. You arrived in Sol system expecting war. But Sol is no longer under your jurisdiction. Earth wrote itself out of reality. What you see is the echo. A final chapter waiting for punctuation." One last command ship tried to launch a full antimatter payload at the cruiser. Missiles armed, engines screamed. But the moment they fired, the torpedoes turned backward mid-flight, re-entered the launch tubes, and destroyed the ship that birthed them. And so, in their final act of desperation, the invaders defeated themselves, proving once again that arrogance is the most fragile armor of all. Ship logs recorded the line before it happened. Karzan trembled. "You're killing us with words?" Vance responded, sharp and final. "No. You killed yourselves with your story. I'm just giving it the proper ending." The fleet broke. Some tried to jump. Some fired wildly into the void. Some just shut down, crews curled in silence, waiting for deletion. In the black void where Earth once stood, the cruiser human will remain still, but now it unfolded. Not metal. Not mechanical. Its surface opened like a book, pages of quantum light slicing across space. Every glowing page was a rewritten battle, a broken empire, a defeated tyrant. Zarkan battle logs failed. Memories failed. Ships disappeared. Names evaporated. Entire bloodlines undone with each closing chapter. And then silence. Darius Vance whispered one final line across the stars, echoing into what remained of the cosmos. The Galactic War Fleet invaded Earth in 2793. And Earth had already left the story. Nothing remained. Only the page. The remnants of the once mighty Zarkan fleet hung in silence, trembling in formation as if afraid to move, to breathe, to even exist. Only 37,000 ships remained. They had lost thousands without a single shot from Earth. Dreadnoughts gone. Memories fractured. Even names, vanished from their logs like dreams they never lived. And yet, the voice continued. Log entry, Day 2. Narrative recursion confirmed. Zarkan Command has entered the second act of their final performance. Expect increased paranoia, spontaneous betrayal, and strategic erosion. Karzan paced his command deck with feral rage boiling under his skin. He no longer barked orders. He whispered them, fearful they'd be used against him. Every word he spoke seemed to echo back at him seconds later, written into status logs that updated before he gave the command. His own actions no longer felt like his. Silence the signal, he said again, for the 5th time. Destroy that ship. A technician turned pale and sweating. Commander, we tried jamming, we tried black box isolation. The voice isn't transmitting. It's embedded in the system. And the backups. Even the firmware. Even the logs before we arrived. How? The technician hesitated, his voice cracking. Sir, the voice has been there, since before we were born. The code was planted in our NAV core. It didn't enter with the ship, it was waiting for activation. Across the fleet, systems glitched. Crew members spoke lines they didn't intend to. Officers found their orders overwritten with strange poetic structures. Medical reports appeared before injuries happened. One pilot's retina HUD scrolled a line. He dies 6 seconds after blinking. The pilot screamed and kept his eyes open. For 6 full seconds. Then blinked. Then died. Karzin smashed his fist against the hull, drawing blood. I will not be played. I will not be read like some fiction. Vance's voice returned, more intimate now. Oh, Karzin. But you were always a character. That was your fatal flaw. You believed the universe needed your permission to change. It never did. Why us? Karzin roared. Why the Zarkan Imperium? You declared a war on memory. You burned our history. You erased our ancestors from your records. You called Earth a mistake that should have been aborted by the stars. But we survived. We remembered ourselves when no one else would. And then we remembered you. We came to bring order. You came to bring silence. But humans don't go quietly. You've noticed. One of the remaining dread fortresses, the Pride of Vorga, spun in space, its crew having ejected into the void without reason. No distress calls. No alarms. Just one final message scrawled across its hull in burning plasma. Your chapters end. Ours begin. An emergency council of surviving fleet commanders gathered via secure transmission, though nothing felt secure anymore. Sub-Commander Velkar, the only one not visibly shaken, addressed them. We're not fighting humans anymore. We're fighting something else. Their minds, their memory, something beyond physical conflict. They're rewriting reality, one line at a time. They are using metaphor as weaponry, another officer said flatly. I watched 2 of my gunners speak in rhyme for 10 minutes before detonating. Every word matched what Vance predicted. Every breath. Every hesitation. Metaphor doesn't kill ships. Karzin snarled. No, Velkar answered coldly. But belief does. If your fleet believes in failure hard enough, it becomes real. They've turned narrative into consensus reality. A single line, spoken with conviction, erases us more completely than any bomb. Karzin clenched his jaw. Then we erase the author. Velkar nodded. There is only one way to do that. Enter the anomaly. The singularity. Destroy whatever Earth became. No one enters that and comes back. I'm not suggesting we return. Velkar's ship turned toward the black sphere at the center of the battlefield. The rest of the council screamed at him, accusations of madness, betrayal, heresy, but he had already muted them. The stars warped as he descended. Inside was not space. It was concept. He floated through structures made of thoughts. Cathedrals of memory. Statues of language. Cities shaped by emotion. Then, rising from it all, a single impossible construct, the library. It contained no books. It was the book. Endless, recursive, a neural network made of story. And at the center, Darius Vance, or something like him, stood, not as a man, but as an embodiment. A shifting silhouette of language and shadow, flickering between every form humanity had ever imagined themselves to be. Velkar raised his rifle, but found it dissolved into words before he could aim. You made it, Vance said. You're braver than the rest. What are you? I am the narrator now. Earth evolved. We let go of form. We became idea, thought, author, reader. And when the galaxy forgot us, we wrote ourselves back. Why do I still exist? Because someone must read the ending. You're not the villain, Velkar. You're the witness. Outside, Karzin had ordered his final attack. The remaining fleet launched all antimatter warheads toward the human will. The missiles turned around mid-flight. Each one carried a single inscription, visible even from the bridge. This was your final sentence. Then they struck the Zarkan fleet. Explosions filled the system. But not like traditional warfare. These weren't physical blasts, they were deletions. Ships blinked out of record. Time reversed. Officers became children. Then stardust. Then myths. Then silence. Only Karzin remained crawling across the floor of his collapsing command bridge. His body flickered with every failed memory. Vance? He coughed. You can't erase a people. Vance's voice, now a whisper from within his own skull, replied. You erased us first. And then Karzin forgot who he was. In orbit, Velkar drifted in silence. Alone. Around him, nothing remained of the fleet. Just a bright light where Earth used to be. A new sun. And on its surface, written in orbital trails of stardust, humanity. The end of their story was the beginning of ours. Velkar drifted in silence, his ship pulsing with the faint hum of broken logic. All Zarkan systems were offline. Not from damage, but from contradiction. The core processors had refused to compute the nature of what he'd seen. There was no battlefield, no enemy formation, no tactical chart. Just a void humming with narrative gravity, impossible and undeniable. He had crossed the singularity expecting data. What he found was history rewritten as code, memory woven into form, an Earth, gone, replaced by something terrifyingly human in its complexity. A whisper crackled in his neural link. Welcome to the rewrite. The voice of Darius Vance, once dismissed as a rogue human strategist, now spoke with the cadence of a god pretending to be polite. Velkar forced his interface back online through sheer will. You've turned story into a weapon. No, Vance replied evenly. We turned story into armor. You fired missiles at myths. You tried to conquer a people who no longer occupy one reality. You still exist, Velkar said. You're talking to me. You're real. Reality is the part we rewrote. Across the void, Vance appeared, not in flesh but in projection, threads of light forming the silhouette of a man dressed in the historical garb of every human war at once. Ancient plate armor, a colonial overcoat, a space admiral's badge, a poet's quill at his collar. You misunderstand what Earth became, Vance continued. We realized no weapon you wield can kill what's been remembered. You erased our colonies. You buried our names. But the moment a child told the story of her ancestors, we reformed. Velkar's hands clenched. You're not gods. You're parasites feeding on perception. We're authors, Vance said. And you're still in the prologue. Behind Velkar's ship, the remnants of the Zarkan fleet tried launching another wave. From above, their remaining command unit detonated without contact. No blast wave, no impact, just a single phrase appearing across their central screen. This vessel ceases to exist due to poor characterization. The fleet scrambled. They abandoned ranks. Ships veered away from formation like birds panicked mid-flight. Your soldiers are tired, Vance said. They've been looped, rewritten, folded into exposition. You wrote your empire as the unstoppable force. But you gave us a weakness, hubris. You let us be the underdog. You twist laws of nature. Velkar growled. This is sorcery. It's narration. Stronger than sorcery. Deadlier than prophecy. You trained your AI to learn from battle data. Ours learned from story structure. Do you know what that means? We can predict you. Down to the breath. Velkar's ship began to vibrate. His systems flooded with paragraphs. Character arc initiated. Subversion pending. His memories distorted. He saw himself shouting orders he'd never given, watching scenes he'd never lived, unless they were about to happen. I still have command authority, Velkar shouted. I can override fleet consensus and deploy every black hole warhead we have. You can't, Vance said. But you won't. I will. You just said you will. Which is exactly what the antagonist says before triggering their downfall. Velkar reached for the trigger. The interface locked. Vance nodded solemnly. And now we begin your descent. The ship's lights flickered. All around him, windows into other timelines opened. In one, Velkar died screaming. In another, he knelt before a Terran tribunal. In another still, he was human, laughing, drinking, telling stories. This isn't warfare, Vance said. This is authorship. You came with dreadnoughts. We came with climax, pacing, and setup. You ignored foreshadowing. You dismissed exposition. Now you're in the final act, and you haven't earned redemption. One Zarkan cruiser tried to suicide dive into the human will. It turned 90 degrees mid-flight and destroyed its own hangar bay instead. A message scrolled across every fleet ship. Deus Ex Machina denied. You don't get a miracle, Vance said. Only an ending. What do you want? Velkar whispered. Is this revenge? No. This is preservation. You tried to delete us. So we wrote a version of reality where your erasure failed, and ours succeeded. You are not the villain here. You're the warning. Velkar breathed heavily, blood pounding. If you kill us all, the galaxy will retaliate. No one remembers your empire anymore. Outside, the stars began to dim. Not fade, vanish. Velkar watched as constellations disappeared. Data logs no longer recognized them. They weren't being destroyed. They were being unwritten. Stop, he whispered. You're still speaking because I wrote you that way, Vance replied gently. You were never meant to survive this. But you are being spared, for now, because a good story needs a witness. Ships blinked out like punctuation, periods dropping from a page. Battleships turned into ellipses. Entire command structures evaporated into blank space. All that remained was Velkar's ship, alone in a sea of editorial silence. You think this is peace? Velkar asked. You think a galaxy built on deletion won't eventually eat itself? No. But we're not finished writing yet. The void began to shimmer. A shape emerged. Not a planet, something else. A construct made of memory and narrative, rotating in fragments of metaphor and relics of forgotten history. It pulsed with a rhythm older than war. That, Vance said, is Earth's successor. It's alive? No. It's remembered. As long as a single voice speaks our name, we endure. As long as someone imagines what humanity could be, we persist. We are not eternal because we refuse to die. We are eternal because we were loved. Velkar collapsed into his chair, numb. He looked at his reflection, his face blurred, undefined, unsure whether he still existed. You could have destroyed us quietly, he murmured. Why the spectacle? Vance smiled, voice now fading into soft narration. Because you chose war. You demanded a spectacle. And Earth always delivers a good show. The last thing Velkar saw was a single word forming in his vision, etched across the stars. Epilogue. The final Zarkan transmission ended mid-sentence. No screams, no alarms, no heroic last stand. Just a whisper cut short, as if someone had torn the page from the galaxy. What remained of the fleet was silence, and a single surviving ship, Velkar's. His systems flickered, struggling to process an existence that no longer had reference points. Star charts were empty. Temporal beacons gone. The neural net was void. He wasn't drifting through space anymore. He was drifting through an absence of context. The voice returned, quieter now, not mocking, not cold, almost reverent. Epilogues are strange things. Some end in triumph. Others in reflection. Yours, Velkar, ends in understanding. He didn't respond. He had no words left. His species, his command, his empire, all reduced to footnotes in a narrative no longer theirs. Darius Vance continued, tone even, the voice of someone who no longer needed to shout because everything else was gone. Do you remember how this started? Vance asked. You invaded a world you thought was weak. Primitive. Stubborn. You sent war, propaganda, entropy. You thought history would forget us, that time would grind us down until we were dust between footnotes. But you never understood humanity. You saw our weapons. You never read our stories. Velkar swallowed hard, unsure if his throat still functioned. You rewrote reality. No, Vance said. We rewrote our reality. You just followed us in without reading the warnings. You erased everything I knew. We didn't erase. We edited. We offered the galaxy a different narrative. One without tyrants in gold armor pretending their wars were order. One where stories mattered more than fleets. Outside the window, something pulsed. Not light. Not matter. It was rhythm. Language. Shapes from Earth's myths flowed in constellations: dragons, serpents, towers, blades, a woman cradling a broken world. All drawn from the dreams of species the Zarkans had tried to erase. You turned belief into a weapon, Belkar said bitterly. Vance corrected him. Into a foundation. Empires like yours burn worlds and think victory comes from silence. But we made sure someone was always speaking, telling, writing. And once enough voices echoed, the galaxy bent. Velkar closed his eyes. So what now? You let me drift until I vanish like the rest? No. You survive. Not because you deserve to, but because even villains deserve a reader. A final witness. Someone to tell others what happens when you try to conquer a story that isn't yours. He shook his head slowly. There's no one left to tell. There will be, Vance said calmly. You'll find them. Or they'll find you. But your voice will carry something different now. Not command. Not fear. Just warning. Velkar's ship shuddered. Not with force, but release. Systems returned, but different. The screens displayed a single phrase. New narrative granted. Roll, the reluctant chronicler. He stared, hollowed. And if I refuse? You won't, said Vance. Because now you understand what happens when you try to override a culture that refuses to be quiet. Below them, the void filled with form. Earth hadn't disappeared. It had transcended. The singularity now spun like a new star, white-blue, breathing with symbolic energy. Around it, orbital fragments glimmered with runes from every human language, circling in a harmony that was both technical and poetic. Not defense platforms. Not weapons. Just reminders. Vance's final words came slowly, softly, and yet each one hit like a detonated truth. Humanity is not the strongest. Not the smartest. Not the most advanced. But we are the most stubborn storytellers the universe ever spat out. You thought you were ending us. All you did was give us the best plot twist in 1,000 generations. The voice faded. Not cut off, just concluded. Velkar's ship now pointed away from the anomaly, guided by something that wasn't propulsion or code. A gentle push. A literary suggestion. Behind him, Earth's successor glowed like punctuation in an otherwise broken paragraph of stars. His console blinked. Chapter 1. A survivor begins to speak. He hovered his hands over the controls. Not to fire. Not to flee. Just to record. His voice cracked as he activated the log. My name is Velkar. I was commander of the Zarkan Imperium. And I saw the last war we ever tried to win. It wasn't fought with weapons. It wasn't fought with machines. It was fought with memory, with conviction, with the refusal to be forgotten. He looked once more toward the singularity and exhaled. Earth didn't disappear. It became the story. And now we all live in it. A distant voice answered, not Vance's, not human, but ancient, feminine, and laced with a quiet sadness. And you were the reader. Then the stars rewrote themselves. In a distant corner of the galaxy, explorers one day found a lone Zarkan vessel orbiting a nameless system, broadcasting a repeating message in every known language. Do not come to rewrite what you haven't read. Do not fight what remembers itself. Earth was the last page. And the first word of what comes next. The galaxy listened. And for the first time in its history, it hesitated before drawing its weapons. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because someone, somewhere, still whispered the name of humanity. And stories like that don't die. The transmissions had stopped. Velkar drifted in a dead channel universe where no signal bounced back, no stars responded, and no name came up on any scan. Not even his own. He was a relic now, a breathing remnant of a war no longer logged in any database. He had no rank. No orders. No superiors. No enemies. Just memory. Just the burden of witnessing. Every night, if time could be called that anymore, he replayed the final moments in his thoughts, trying to edit them, as if remembering differently might change the outcome. They hadn't just lost. The Zarkan Imperium had been deleted, its stories unwritten, its history dethreaded from the galactic narrative. Velkar was the last word left hanging at the end of a sentence that had already been erased. He often wondered if he was alive or just still being read. He tried transmitting a distress beacon weeks ago. Or what he assumed were weeks. The timestamp function no longer returned consistent values. Sometimes it claimed he was 2 seconds old. Sometimes 2,000 years. He stopped checking after a while. But the beacon failed, of course. Not because the system was broken, but because no one in the galaxy could remember his language. It had been overwritten. He couldn't even understand his own logs. His species' words were now placeholder symbols. He had resisted at first. Refused to narrate anything. If this was the punishment, he would meet it in silence. But silence was worse. Silence allowed the memories to twist inward, sharpen, dig into marrow. So he did the only thing left. He spoke. Into the ship. Into nothing. Into the dark. My name was Velkar. I served an empire built on certainty. I watched certainty die. Each day, he told more. He recounted what he'd seen, what he'd felt. He spoke of fire that never burned, weapons that bent backward, ships that deleted themselves mid-flight. Of a man named Darius Vance who spoke like a tactician and struck like a myth. Of a planet that became a singularity. A culture that weaponized memory. And how every shot they fired only fed the narrative that buried them. I didn't understand what they were doing. Now I do. They didn't just evolve technology. They evolved meaning. He catalogued the loss of structure. How the Zarkan chain of command collapsed not from enemy fire, but because its narrative logic stopped holding up under the new rules. Officers started failing to exist before their decisions. Subordinates acted on orders that hadn't yet been given. It became impossible to be strategic when cause no longer guaranteed effect. We thought war was about superiority. They made it about authorship. We built fleets. They built context. And context devoured us. He began theorizing. Not military doctrine, those were useless now, but story structure. Pacing. Themes. Character arcs. Tropes. Foreshadowing. Inversion. By week 6, he recognized the shift in himself. He was no longer trying to command. He was analyzing plot. Searching for a pattern in his own actions. A reason he still existed. And then, one night, again, if time meant anything, he said something he hadn't dared before. I think I was meant to survive. And something changed. The console lit up. Acknowledged. The message was simple, soft, and absolute. The first response he had received in months. Or moments. He stood. Eyes wide. Who sent that? The screen answered. You did. And then another line. Chapter 2, the chronicler begins. He understood. Not all at once, but enough. He wasn't the last Zarkan. He was the first something else. Not the villain, not the hero, but the continuity. The bridge. He had survived not because he'd escaped deletion, but because he had a role to play in what came next. He wasn't the end of his people. He was their footnote. Their final citation. Their warning. He spoke again. Louder this time. This is the voice of Velkar, former commander of the Zarkan fleet. To anyone who hears this, Earth is not gone. It is changed. It is remembered. It cannot be conquered. It cannot be overwritten. Do not try. I watched empires dissolve in grammar. I watched identity collapse in syntax. I watched reality bow to story. The beacon, once inert, activated. Not in frequencies. In text. It began to project a tale, his tale, into the dark. No signal. No code. Just narrative. A pure story floating through void, waiting to be picked up not by sensors, but by minds ready to understand it. They called it war. But it was always a narrative duel. And they won not because they had better weapons. They won because they had better questions. He paced the deck, no longer trembling. There was peace in knowing your purpose, even if you weren't the victor. Especially if you weren't the victor. Because that made you necessary. That made you human, in a strange way. They asked what happens when a species refuses to be forgotten. And then they answered it. They didn't hide. They narrated. They didn't resist. They rewrote. They didn't disappear. They outlived the story being told. He stopped. A distant hum grew beneath his feet. The stars returned. Not all. Just a few. A constellation forming itself around him, not of stars, but of phrases. Ideas. Concepts. Each one glowing faintly in language he recognized. The war that ended before it began. The soldier who became a storyteller. The story that refused to die. He looked around and smiled, for the first time since the war. You're listening, aren't you? No answer came. But the ship no longer drifted. It had direction. And the stars around him no longer blinked. They formed letters. He was no longer lost. He was being read.